everyone, and welcome to this special webcast on how to measure the impact of a great employee experience. I'm Laura Sabattini, Principal Researcher at the Conference Board in the Human Capital Center, and today's program is about how we can connect employee experience to business results and how we can understand the real value that an engaged workforce can bring to the workplace. In your slide that I'm going to try to move here we go, some of the key areas that we're going to discuss today include past, present, and future definitions of impact. So understanding basically what we mean by impact, how companies can measure and demonstrate the impact of their engagement programs, as well as connect those programs to their business metrics and results. These are issues that are all key to many organizations today, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from our guest speakers. Before we get to all of that, though, let me give you some housekeeping and participation guidelines about this webcast. First of all, you can participate and comment throughout the hour. I will be monitoring the conversation. Just type your comments in the chat box at the very bottom of your screen. If you want to download our presentation and the deck that we are going to go throughout the presentation, you can do so by clicking on the PDF icon also at the bottom of your screen. After today's live presentation, there was going to be a recording of this webcast available on the Conference Board website. It typically takes about 48 hours to be posted. So if you know of other people who might be interested in this presentation and the content, please feel free to forward the information. If you're attending live today, you actually can request recertification credits for this webcast. As you can see on your screen, we offer HRCI, SHRM, and CPE credits. To get those credits, though, you have to be online live and follow the entire hour of the presentation. You'll also have to click on a pop-up box that comes up throughout the presentation. Finally, the very last housekeeping remarks, there's going to be a brief evaluation at the end of this webcast. Please take a couple of minutes to fill the evaluation. It really helps us with our content and our offerings for these webcasts. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our speakers today who are joining us from Seattle, from the West Coast and the Limeade headquarters there. We have another Laura, Dr. Laura Hemel, and her colleague Lindsay Lagrid from Limeade. Dr. Laura Hemel is an organizational psychologist. She is Limeade's Chief People and Chief Science Officer. She leads the people team at Limeade and also the Limeade Institute, where they conduct research on employee engagement and connect those research findings to applicable insights. And we're going to hear some of those insights today. Lindsay Lagrid is a solution architect at Limeade. She works with customers to improve the employee experience processes, and her area of expertise are product solutions and so she works with HR leaders to make sure that they achieve their goals when it comes to employee engagement. So Laura and Lindsay, welcome to the webcast, and I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks so much, Laura. Let's see if we can keep all the L's straight today. Thanks so much for having us. We're really looking forward to discussing this topic with you all today. And we want to get started by talking about that word impact. I think it's something that we all think about a lot as leaders in our organization and leaders of people strategy. But I love this definition of impact, to have a strong effect on someone or something. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, in human resources, we forget about that strong component. We forget that work and the experience that people have at work can have a really profound and significant impact on their human experience and on the business's success. And so what we want to do today is ask you to think bigger and think about that word strong. Are the strategies that you're developing strong? Are you going after big concepts? Are you really thinking broadly about what you can do within human resources to radically impact people's lives and the business of your organization. So we just love to start there to kind of lay the groundwork that we're going to ask you, maybe a little uncomfortable. We may ask you to kind of let go of some old ways of thinking and really think big about the opportunity we have to do great things at our organizations.
So just to reiterate what we're going to focus on today, we're going to talk about this idea of impact and maybe how we've thought about it in the past and what we want to kind of push on you to think about for the future and really get you to understand the opportunity that you have within your function to have this bigger impact. And what we also hope is that you will leave with some good next steps, something tangible, because this idea is kind of a big one. Maybe just a few tangible actions that you can take to try to move this forward. Lindsay and I have the kind of unique opportunity to talk to a lot of different people in human resources. And what we're surprised at, I guess, sometimes is how hesitant people tend to be to really think about the work that they're doing every day and how it could be impacting the business. And we just see that, oh my gosh, there's such an opportunity. There's such a way to start thinking about this connection. So that's what we're hoping today is get you a little excited, maybe start thinking about some of the things that you can do in your organization. So to set the stage, we'd like to do this poll question. So I think if we can go live with the poll question, what we want to understand is who's on this call today. So which best describes your role? Are you in benefits, talent management? Which part of HR might you be in? Or maybe consulting, or not even in HR altogether? Because we think that knowing that helps us a lot to know kind of how we might frame this discussion.
What a neat blend.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of people who look like they're from talent management. And then other, which is maybe people who are focused on measurement or something like that. But that's really interesting to see the broad distribution. Okay, so this helps us a lot. So when we talk today, we might be using some specific examples, but we'll try to broaden the audience, broaden the subject matter as we go through our talk today, knowing that there's a good representation of lots of different HR functions.
Which to me sort of speaks to this is a universal challenge.
Yes.
We all face. It doesn't matter whether you're in learning and development or recruiting or diversity and inclusion. We all need to figure out, how do I make it so clear that what I do every day is not a nice to have, it's not a sort of soft, fluffy HR thing. This is business critical, mission critical to our organization. So I'm glad that we have unique perspectives and varied perspectives here with us today. It'll be a great conversation.
Yes. All right. So let's dig in now that we know that. All right. So let's start with the first question, which is really, how do you currently measure the impact of your program? When we talk to people, when we're in our travels and meeting with our customers and prospects, we interestingly tend to see that most organizations are thinking about metrics that are related to participation. So kind of whatever silo you're in within HR, it tends to be that most people think about things like the number of people that registered or the number of people who completed something. In the benefits world, it could be the number of people who got a flu shot that we offered. Or in the learning and development, how many people did that particular training. Even in engagement, it's how many people finished the survey, right? How many people hit submit in the survey.
Yeah, we tend to hear from customers that there's sort of this transactional characteristics to what they're measuring, and that those metrics haven't really changed much, that they continue to look at, okay, well, year over year, did more people do the transaction, whatever that happens to be, this year than last year, and that's considered quote unquote success.
Right.
And I think that's been okay so far, but I think it's going to change very quickly, where leaders of organizations are going to say, so what? What does that mean for us as an organization? And so we hope that in today's discussion, you can sort of get out ahead of that and think think bigger about that impact.
And even within human resources, there's so many different ways that even across silos, we use some of the same words, but they have different meanings, really different meanings. So in the benefits world, sometimes we use the term engagement to mean the number of people who participated in something. Mm-hmm. While in talent management, obviously, we use engagement to mean much more of that idea of being excited to come to work, having that deep connection and sense of purpose through your work, which is so much different, right? It's qualitatively different from just the number of people who participated in something. So if you think about trying to solve for this from a people perspective, man, oh man, we use the same word to mean really different things. And I guess what we're kind of pushing on here is it tends to be quantity that we talk about now in the current state. And what we probably would like to see more of a shift is into quality, like the quality of something, the nature of something, not just the number of people who did something.
Yeah. There's an experiential element to what we're after, is what does it feel like to experience this instead of just, did you do it?
Yes, exactly.
One of the things that I think can be a really interesting exercise to sort of evaluate, am I measuring my programs, my strategy in a way that's powerful, is who's asking to see this data. A lot of times when I'm meeting with customers, we have this conversation, they say, well, my boss, like I get the report and I send it to my boss. And so we're never getting to the CHRO, the CEO level, sometimes not even to the sort of strategic people leaders. And to me, that's a real indicator that what you're measuring and how you're defining impact is not what those people really want to see. I want you to create a report that people have marked on their calendars. They're so excited to get it because they know it's going to help drive their strategy, not something that, no one's very excited to see because it's kind of what we measured in 2007 and 8 and 9 and 10. And so it's a great little litmus test for you to do. Who's asking to see my report? Yeah. And is anyone asking, or is it I'm delivering this because I think this is what I'm supposed to do every year?
Yeah, I think that's a telling sign in who's asking for it, right? Who wants to be in the presentation of the results? Who's not there, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't have your manager's manager interested in those results, if you don't have a C-level person who cares about those results, I think you can aspire for more. Mm-hmm. I think there's more that you can do to make this be something that they want to hear about.
Absolutely. So then once we sort of know who's asking for it or who's not, I always think it's really interesting to think about what happens to the report. So I don't know if you all remember that cartoon about how a bill becomes a law and the little bills walking around Capitol Hill and going from one side of the, all of that fun stuff. I think we all kind of remember that. I like to work with our customers and walk through that experience. Okay, here's your report. It's beautiful. It's bundled. What happens to it next? Does it go in the file for the 2019 report, and that's sort of where it collects dust and the end of its life cycle? Or is that really just the beginning? Does it then become part of a strategy discussion? Does it then fuel budget conversations around investment and resource allocation? Is it compliance, or is it a strategic fuel for the organization? It's very interesting to hear how many people will sort of do the report because the report's supposed to be done, and then nothing happens with it. And that's a lot of your time and energy and resources to not see bear fruit.
Yeah, completely. And what we would argue is that the best-in-class organizations, they're the ones who are taking these kinds of approaches and they're connecting it to people and business results. That it's taking something that in the past we might have thought of as like a program or an initiative, something kind of small that we can get our arms around, but small, connecting that to something that matters to the organization. So you could think about, again, within the benefits space, you could think about, how many people participated in a weight management program, for example, this year compared to last year. And we could say we had a lot more people do it this year compared to last year. Well, you might just argue, so what? What if we, though, could actually connect that to turnover? What if we saw a decrease in turnover between those who participated and those who didn't? I'm betting that turnover is going to be more interesting to the leaders of your organization than participation in a particular program. So what we really are encouraging you to do is think about connecting the work that you do every day to those people and business strategies, to the metrics that matter to the business. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting, and this is kind of a side note, is do you even know what your people strategy is? Do you even know what your business strategy is? This is a real, it's just a practical problem, right? Mm-hmm. That in a lot of cases, people don't know what they are. And that's such a bummer. So any of you that checked HR leadership on the functional survey at the very beginning, like think about that for yourself. I mean, how long ago was it that you talked to your teams about what the people strategy is? Mm-hmm. Do they know it? Is there a place they could go to see it, to remind themselves of it? Is there a slide, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times when I've done interventions or different projects in different organizations, sometimes I'll use the people strategy or the business strategy as part of that intervention, and people will say, can I keep that? Like, yeah. Can you give that to me? And it's so sad that it takes somebody outside coming in to say, here it is, here's your own strategy. But it's a real barrier. And what I would encourage you to do, if you don't have access to what the people strategy is, ask. Mm-hmm. I think it says a lot that you're thinking in that way. It says a lot that you are being proactive. But I don't wait.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. It's sort of, we believe it's an organization's responsibility, and in a perfect world, organizations would do an amazing job of clearly and concisely communicating this, not just to people in HR, but to the whole organization. But let's not wait for someday. And I agree with you, Laura, that seeking out that information, seeking out the people strategy and also the business strategy. I mean, if you build planes, then there's probably some key business metrics around quality and safety incidents and production rates. And if you produce technology or whatever it is that you're in, remind yourself of the organization's goals and missions as a business as well, because as we're going to talk about, there's a real strong connection between the people metrics and the people strategy and the business metrics and the business strategy. And so familiarizing yourself with both of those is critical to putting together a metric that's impactful.
Yeah. So what's working well? And there are a lot of really cool stories we hear about things that are going well. What I think is encouraging is that more organizations are trying to measure things that matter to them. So there's this desire to really quantify things that sometimes are hard to quantify. So we're starting to see that topics like well-being and employee engagement and organizational culture, that organizations are trying to get their hands wrapped around them. So that's, to me, really encouraging, is we're starting to measure those hard things. And it's just one of my pet peeves. It's just because it's hard to measure doesn't mean you can't measure it, right? And there are absolutely approaches you can take. There's a lot of existing measures that are out there that you can go call from. A lot of really great academic research that's out there that you can call from. But I think what's working well is that we're starting to really realize we have to measure this stuff.
Yep. And as a result of that, one of the other things that I think is working really well is we're starting to see much more interesting groups of people get together.
Yes.
And I will say there's been some interesting bumps along the way to getting there. I've actually been in a couple of meetings in the last 18 months or so where leaders from different silos within HR were both in the meeting and they didn't know that the other one worked at the same company they did. And so they introduced themselves thinking that the other one worked at Limeade. And it was this sort of awkward, like, oh, wait, you're all on the same team. But what's really refreshing about that is you ask diversity and inclusion, what's your goal? We want to create an amazing experience for our employees here where they can really thrive and be their unique self. Awesome. You're head of the well-being strategy. What do you want? We want people to thrive here and feel that we care about them so they can have this amazing experience. Cool. Wait, am I hearing a trend?
Yes.
Everybody's after the same thing. We all want to create this experience where employees thrive, and we all do that through different lenses. But I'm starting to see people work together and think about that never happened before.
Yeah.
And not only have they not worked together in the past, they've competed against one another.
Yep.
You got how many minutes in the town hall meeting? You got how many square inches in the newsletter? Literal internal competition for highlighting their specific initiative and program when it has the same goal as everyone else's. So this concerted effort and this aligned strategy gives me a lot of hope, because I think we're taking the complexity off of the plate of the employee to navigate.
Yeah.
And we're finally dealing with it at a leadership level.
Completely. And solving for the employee experience with being more employee-centric, I think is such a good evolution. It's such a good next step. But what that means is we have to break down those HR silos, right? And we have to peek over those walls and start working together more. It's so refreshing when we see a group that has, right, the power when everybody in HR is working towards this common experience of creating one that is a really good one for employees. And so, but it's hard. It's to your point. I mean, what I was saying before is that we sometimes use the same words to mean different things. We have different programs that we're all using, but gosh, what really matters at the end of the day is that we're thinking about this from the employee's perspective, not our individual functional expert, areas.
Yeah, and I think that's a direct reaction and response to what we know about the world of work today, which is that employees have more power now than ever.
Yeah.
There's a statistic that someone that graduated from college my year will have 16 jobs.
Oh my gosh.
I will onboard 16 times. And that's because I have really high expectations for what an employer provides. And it's not having 19 usernames and passwords and events competing and strategies competing and not knowing where to put my attention. And so I love seeing this shift to creating an experience that is employee-centric. I think it's going to result in so many wonderful things for not just the people that come to work every day, but the businesses and organizations, and the innovation and the problem solving and the collaboration is all going to be enriched by creating an experience that's human-centric and employee-centric.
So what's not working? I think we've been saying some of this stuff as we've been going, but what we think is that we're playing too small. We really are playing too small with a focus on our individual programs, our individual initiatives. We're focusing on transactions, things that are just like the results and on business results. Okay, thank you. Sorry, froze up there. So we're playing really small is what our point is. We think there's a lot more of an opportunity to play bigger, that we should get outside of our programs and initiatives and not just focus on the transactions, right? Not just focus on butts and seats or number of people. We have to start measuring the things that matter. So it's a little hard because it's easy for us. We all are busy, right? We all have so much going on, and it's easy to say, well, that's just not my job. Affecting turnover in the organization, that's just not my job. My job is this thing that I feel like I can control, right? That it feels too big to go outside of my program or my initiative. And it's what we've always done, right? But what we really think needs to happen is we have to start transitioning to have our metrics match up with this focus on the employee experience that's overarching, that's integrated.
Yeah, and if you decide not to do that, sort of know that organizations are sort of harder than ever on programs and strategies. I mean, you've got to have a quick value story, and you've got to be making changes and making impact pretty quickly. So while we know it's really uncomfortable, this is to ensure that your strategy and your program continues to be something that's invested in. Yeah. This is a time where it's easy for organizations. Every organization is looking for cost savings. And so if you haven't made it super crystal clear how what you do every day impacts the business success, there, I think, is inherent risk more so than there's ever been before. One of the other things that I think is sort of not working great is that awkward transition phase where people, they sort of want to do this bigger thing and then they ask for the same exact metrics. Right. And they're just, it's this uncomfortable sort of pubescent phase of trying to figure out how to make it all fit together, that we hope to be able to help give you a framework to make that transition a little easier. That's perfect.
So to Lindsay's point, we're kind of at this funny stage, right? Pubescent is a really good way of describing it. Another way of thinking about it is we sort of have a foot in two boats. So the boat of the past, where we've done this very, registration, participation, counting number of people who've done things boat, one foot, and the other foot is in the future of saying, gosh, I see the possibilities of connecting what I work on every day to something that actually matters to the organization from a people metrics perspective or from a business metrics perspective. And so people have feet in both boats and the boats are moving away from each other. So it's time to make the leap and to jump into the future and really take that next step. And again, getting back to this point of being in our silos, doing just the stuff that we've always done, it's just not going to work going forward. There's more and more demand from people who aren't going to put up with this old-fashioned traditional way of thinking about work and HR. So if you want to be part of the future, if your organization desires to be more progressive and one that attracts talent, you've got to take that leap and get into that other boat. That I thought might be an interesting thing to think about is something that recently came out from the National Association of Corporate Boards. They just came out with a report that goes to kind of sets a standard. It's called the Blue Ribbon Report. It sets a standard for how boards need to be run. And what's interesting about this is the name of it is called Culture as a Corporate Asset. And they are now expecting boards to be monitoring the culture of the organizations that they serve. So if this is going to start coming from at the board level, that you need to understand culture, you need to measure culture, man, oh man, it's not going to be long until we're going to start feeling pressure in human resources to say, how are you doing that? Mm-hmm. And saying, oh, there's this little program over here and we measure the number of people who participate is not going to cut it when we're talking about measuring culture. So there's going to be there's a lot, I believe, of kind of pressure and pointing the arrow to say we have got to start making these changes.
And it makes a ton of sense that boards would be thinking about things like that. I even think about, you're at a barbecue and you're meeting a new person and they say, oh, I work at such and such company, and you go, oof,
right?
Yikes.
It's reputation.
What's that like?
Right?
Yeah, that's a very real thing. And so I'm not surprised to hear that, but I'm optimistic, and I think that's another great point to this. Get in the future boat.
Yeah, get in the future boat. So one of the things that I always like to point out is I know this stuff is hard, and I know there's a practical component of all of this. And I bet some of you are saying, well, wait a second. I don't have statisticians on my staff. I don't have research psychologists who are designing these studies. What do I do? And I want you to just know there are other options. If you don't have the ability to do those really in-depth research studies to be able to show the statistical connection between what you're doing and those people and business results, I just want to share some other things to think about. So one of them is you can just think about looking at the data that you have from the work that you're doing on your particular program and initiative and put it side by side with data that the organization might care about. So it could, again, be people results. So it could be put it side by side with turnover data. It could be put it side by side with customer satisfaction data. Whatever, it could be safety data. I know a lot of organizations care about safety. Literally just create a table and look at, kind of eyeball it, the correlation between the things you're working on and other things the organization cares about. You can also take that and transform it into like a heat map where you can do just color code, high scores, low scores, red, yellow, green, and just look and compare. That has had a huge impact in many organizations who don't have the ability to look at what is that statistical relationship, what's the correlation between those things, but instead the heat map tends to tell a story. If it doesn't tell a story, that's interesting too. Maybe there's something about your approach or what you're doing that needs to be tweaked. So that's one really basic thing you can do is just look at the data side by side. What I also encourage organizations to do is if you can't show your own results, go and look for places that have shown related results. So for example, when I was just talking about your program and safety or your program and customer satisfaction, you could go and look at what does the existing academic research say about these topics. Can you see anything interesting in the academic research that shows a connection between the two of those things? To build a case for maybe hiring a research team. Also, there's a lot of industry papers, industry norms, industry studies that happen. Maybe if it's not pure academic, it's more within your industry that you can go and look for those things. So those are some practical things. One last, really something I've seen work really well in some organizations is to connect what your work is to the team that does your employee engagement survey. So that team, usually they're pretty kind of tight with the real estate of the survey. So I get that. And I many times managed those surveys and was the one that was tight with the real estate of those surveys. But if you can think about getting an item into the survey that measures the things you're focused on, like for example, if you're a learning and in a learning and development function, if you can get something related to growth mindset or opportunities for development that your employees are seeing, and just to see how that's changing over time, also to see how that topic is correlated with some of the other things in the employee engagement survey. I've seen that work really well to start to get people to think bigger about the things that they're working on. So connecting it to the employee engagement survey is another really practical approach.
Because I would say that within the space of HR, the employee engagement survey is sort of one of the few places where we have been a little bit more qualitative, a little bit more experiential in the things that we're asking in some cases.
Right.
And so use that to your advantage and see where there's connection or not.
Cool. Let's just talk about a couple different examples and how you can maybe start shifting your mindset. So within well-being, the well-being space, this is a space that we've been in. Traditionally, we are in other spaces now too, but we talk to a lot of people who are in the well-being space. And so in well-being, it's really about moving away from thinking about the number of people who participate in a program or the number of people who take a well-being assessment, really into, golly, are people actually improving or changing their well-being over time? Do they have higher levels of employee engagement? Is our ability to attract and retain employees, has that changed? Has that gotten better? So that's a really, again, the foot in two boats thing, right? Let's move away from participation. Same idea with diversity and inclusion. Traditionally, it's been focused on thinking about just the number of diverse candidates that we hire, not thinking about, oh my gosh, what happens when people are actually here? Do they feel a sense of inclusion? Do they want to come to work every day? Do they feel engaged? Are we able to retain those amazing people? So again, very different between kind of the traditional way and the new way. In the learning space, it's not about how many people take an online class or show up to an on-site class. Did they actually learn, right? Did they actually change their own learning, and then were they able to apply that learning? I think a lot of people in the learning space are very clear that it has to go to those next levels. And does that have any impact on their engagement? What we know is growth is a big driver statistically in most research studies around engagement. Why aren't we connecting that more? And then finally, even in the engagement space, it's crazy to me, and I've done a lot of employee engagement surveys, how hyper-focused we are on response rates, how many people are actually doing the survey, or how many days it takes to get the reports out to people. And then, we forget the whole point, right? Is what if we are actually focused on increasing employee engagement, improving employee engagement? What are the things we're doing to make that happen, to really move the needle on engagement and not just focus on darn response rates? So really, no matter, those are just 4 examples, no matter what area of HR that you're in, you really can be thinking about the shift away from pure participation metrics into things that matter more to the business. One little note that I feel like I have to say, I've noticed this, that people think, oh, great, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to start measuring those things. I'm going to look for those connections between the stuff I'm focused on and people and business results. And they always expect to see the results, the positive results, right? And I just want to put that out there that you're not always going to see positive results. You're not always going to get the results that you want. But I would argue that that's okay, because by just making that attempt to connect, you're going to see that some things are, right? Some parts of your program or within certain departments, there is a relationship. and you're going to learn more. It's going to enable you to think about how might I modify my program or my approach to actually get to those results. So I just would encourage you, don't be first going in thinking, oh, we're going to get beautiful, amazing, publishable results in the first time we do this. Yeah. Instead, think about it as a journey. Think about that connection to the future and being more progressive of trying to really show how it's connected, what your work is doing is connected to people and business results, and how we might need to change things and modify things to see that progress over time.
But I do think that's a huge reason why people don't necessarily want to do this work, is they're afraid, oh my goodness, what if it's bad? And instead of seeing that as, okay, well, it's probably not bad in its entirety. Right. There's definitely hot spots of good things happening. Yep. And what a gift to be able to further investigate those things, to be able to bring that information to the organization and say, we're doing something wrong, but we're doing some things right here. And so fair human anxiety to not want to get a bad test result, but also seeing that as an opportunity to work smarter and ask smarter questions, I think is a huge advantage.
Yeah, completely agree. So one of the approaches we take, this is just to give you an example of how to think about this connection, something we call the Limeade results model. And you can think about this as sort of a well-being focused approach, but you can take hopefully the concept of it and apply it to anything really. It's just this idea of having the connection between that basic participation stuff that I was talking about before, that we were talking about before, and how you might connect it to people and business results, and how you might be just explicit about it, maybe even write it down. So here we really start with the idea of you have to have people participate to get going, right, to do the things that you want them to do. And as they do that, they start to do things a little bit differently. They start to create new habits, and their well-being starts to improve. Once we see that, we then tend to see changes in people results and changes in business results. So we use this as just a framework. So again, think about this with whatever function you're responsible for. What is that flow through for you? How do you think about connecting that from a just purely logical perspective, and then maybe from like the research or academic perspective? How can you start to make that trail or that silver thread all the way through?
And one thing that I think is helpful, and I've done with customers, is to work backwards. So start with your business metrics. Start with what you know matters to the organization. If you're a healthcare delivery organization, patient outcome and patient satisfaction is probably a really big deal to you. And so is there a relationship between employee engagement and patient satisfaction? Is there a relationship between inclusion and patient outcome? Is there a relationship between turnover and those characteristics? And what's so beautiful, and you referenced earlier, is you don't have to do that research in a primary manner. Spoiler alert, there is a relationship there, and there is existing research to support pretty much any flavor of that story. We know that the better that your people are, the better they're going to do whatever it is that they do for your organization that's going to get you the results that you're after. So we've started with your business results, we've backed into the people result, and then we'll say, okay, well, what helps improve engagement, inclusion, and turnover? What helps improve those people things? And that's where we get to really interesting things like well-being, or like organizational support and having amazing leaders providing those growth opportunities. And then you back into, okay, we've provided those things, is anyone using them? And are they different because they used them? So sometimes I think it's helpful to back into this so that you can then move forward.
Completely. And I think that's the most direct path to do that. I think that's a great idea. Another really basic thing to do is just ask why. Why do we do this? Why do we do this program? And it's crazy sometimes. I mean, I hope most people would say, oh, I can tell you exactly why we do it. But sometimes it's hard to answer. You know, we've been doing these things because we always have done it.
Yep.
It's just sort of the thing we do in HR. It's the thing we're known for. Without really getting to, but why really? You know, what are we trying to influence? And I think it's just would be so healthy for all of us to just do a little bit more thinking about why. Because if we don't have a good answer to that, maybe we shouldn't be doing it.
Absolutely. And I think as you reflect on that question and think about why, is the why employer-centric because we need our employees to do these things for us?
Yeah.
Or is it employee-centric because our singular job is to show these people that we care about them and provide a good experience? And that's where I think we're seeing this massive shift. And so if your why is about what can I get from an employee instead of how can I serve and give so that they can thrive, a little bit of a flag there.
Yeah. And how does that fit with the employee experience, right?
Exactly.
So the next idea on the next slide is just kind of walking through what I said already. It's just this is like one way you could articulate the connection with your people and business results. That your program fosters participation and helps people build habits and have more well-being in the well-being space, right? And because of that, we can connect to people and business results. So just think about that flow through, what it is for you and the work you're doing. What specific people results do you think you're influencing? What specific business results do you think you're influencing? And to Lindsay's point, focusing on how this stuff connects to employee engagement is a really, I'll just tell you, that's a smart way to go, because of all the great research on employee engagement and how it's connected to business results. So if you can connect the work you do to employee engagement in some way, that's sort of a shortcut. Sounds awful, but it is kind of
shoe-in. Yeah. You can almost use this slide as a fill in the blank. A successful diversity and inclusion program that fosters participation is going to help people build the habits that is going to improve diversity and inclusion in our organization, which we know is going to impact how people feel and perform. You can make this your own. And use this as a really interesting way to start bringing new people to the table for your strategic conversations about your initiative. And the reason we feel so strongly about this, Laura and I have gotten some feedback that we can be a little zealous on this topic, is just because we know there's such big dollars and cents available to us here. I think about the ways that our organizations have traditionally thought about measuring and measurement and the impact, and we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars if it's an amazing year. When we're looking at things like burnout and turnover and disengagement and the financial cost and impact to an organization, there's a lot of zeros there. There's an enormous amount of zeros. And so I would rather have all of you have jobs where what you do is connected to something with lots of zeros. For example, burnout can cost an organization $17 billion a year, just in physicians, just in the US. That's how much it's costing us to have our physicians be burning out. That's way more than how much does it cost when people don't do XYZ, fill in the blank. Business turnover costs can be 213% of the salary. That's enormous. To find that next amazing person, to onboard them, to interview, all of those things is incredibly costly. And we know that companies with high engagement levels are 78% more profitable and 40% more productive. Again, this is one of those beautiful things that you don't have to do this research. This is known stuff. And you can really go beyond, okay, I helped 15 people do this, I helped 20 people do this, and really say, because of the work that I do, our organization is saving millions of dollars.
Completely. And that's just a sample, right, of some of the financial impact types of studies or statistics that are out there. There are a lot of others too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we would love to understand if this is something that your organization is thinking about at all. So we have a poll question. To what extent have you or your department or your program started to think about that financial impact? How many of you are putting dollars and cents to the work that you do? Yeah. Really interesting to see. I mean, I think we see most people sort of falling in that middle space there. We got about 6 people who are doing it at a great extent, which I think is where we all want to be. This is no small feat.
Yeah.
This does take reaching across departments. This does take thinking in new and different ways. But the payoff, we believe, is really, really worth it.
Yeah, completely. Interesting, almost kind of a normal-ish distribution, but I guess leaning a little bit towards not as much doing it. Yeah.
And I think
it does make sense. I think it's a huge opportunity for all of us to do this more.
Absolutely.
Thank you for participating in that.
Laura, this is the other Laura. There was a quick question on the board about the slide, dollars and cents. Is that from your own research? Can you provide some reference to that other can, use the data as well?
Yeah, we're actually going to kind of do that next.
Perfect.
So,
never mind that. I just didn't want to lose the question on the slide. Thank you.
Oh, it's great. It's a great question. And this was something that when this came up, so many of our customers were like, well, help me figure this out. If there's all these zeros, help me figure this out. And so if we go to we'll go one slide forward. And we've actually created a live version of this on our website. So if you go to limeade.com/impact, you can plug in your own number of employees. You can plug in your own turnover rate if you happen to know it. If not, we have the national averages in there, and those are all cited resources at the bottom. And you can see, based on your average salary and your turnover rate and the number of employees you have, how many millions of dollars both turnover and disengagement are costing your organization. What was so funny is when we did this with a group of our customers, we had everybody get their phone calculators out and sort of do all this, carry the one stuff, and people were like, oh, I must have done it wrong. I must have done it wrong, because the numbers were so big. And we had to say, no. Your company is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on turnover. Right. Sometimes billions of dollars on disengagement if it's a large organization. And so this is where I think this is a beautiful way to bring more people to the table. Right. To say, hang on a second, this is a real problem. Yep. We can all work together to contribute to shift this.
And so what this gives you is just kind of gives you a feel of the ballpark of numbers we're working with. Then the next part of this is then how might you connect your work to turnover or to engagement or disengagement, right? If you don't do your stuff, how people might be more disengaged. And so that's the connection point that needs to happen next. So imagine that scenario where I was talking to you about, putting the data side by side. Can you start to show a connection between the work you're doing and turnover? And if you can, then you take that and say, all right, and now what we know is this is how much it's costing us. So if we could improve this area that I'm focusing on by 1%, this is how we could save our organization. Yep. So that's what we really encourage you to do, is make those connections. Even, at the most basic level, if any of you are just starting out, what you can do is actually just raise people's awareness around how expensive turnover is in your organization, right? That to me is super eye-opening. There's a lot of different ways, different pieces of turnover, lots of different variables to think of, but this gives you just a feel for the cost of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think helping people understand how big those numbers are, and also helping them see the connections between these things. Yes. There's a relationship between engagement and inclusion and well-being and learning and development, and all of these things are connected because we're dealing with human beings at the core of it, and everything is connected when we're dealing with human beings. So let's start organizing ourselves in a way that reflects that and capitalizing on those connections.
Yeah, perfect. So to sum it all up, what we hope is that you really start thinking about things that you can do in your organization. So maybe it's just thinking about how you might display your data a little bit differently. Maybe it's using the calculator and thinking about turnover or the cost of disengagement in your organization. Maybe it's just having a conversation with the leader of HR around the people strategy, right? All those things are really good steps to take. So what we hope you do is take some action. So you can create and really define the success metrics for your organization and create that alignment. You could think about it kind of alignment up, right? To the people, to the HR leader, to the CEO and the C-suite. You could also think about alignment across, right? We were talking a lot about the HR silos and the opportunity to come together as HR functions and stop just solving for our own individual functions, but think about this bigger thing we're solving for around the whole employee experience and how we might align. And really think about, gosh, if you could hear from your HR leader what she or he cares the most about, maybe there's a way to connect your work to that. And we think that you probably have to use technology in some way to be able to do this in organizations that are bigger, at least. How do you scale? How do you measure the things that matter at scale? But those are just some ideas and things that we hope you get from this, ways to move this forward.
Ways to think bigger, because I think the future demands it, and our employees demand it.
Completely. And the opportunity is there. I mean, I think that's kind of the key point that we want you to see is that you really do have this opportunity to have more of an impact, to show that the work that you care so deeply about, that you put your heart and soul into, is actually connected to something that matters to your organization. So I think it's one of those things that's just good all the way around if we can do.
Absolutely.
So Laura, do you, we probably have some time for some questions. Are there any
Yes.
questions?
First of all, I should mention that it was a very lively conversation happening in the background while you were talking about your examples. We collected a lot more examples from the board, so it was a great. Thank you for everyone for participating. I do have a few questions, and I'm kind of starting, kind of in order of the question asked. So the first one was about the impact of coaching. Have you done any work in this area? What's the impact of coaching, leadership coaching, different levels on some of the results and some of the outcomes that you mentioned during this presentation?
I think what's tricky about, and that's like a really good example of something that can feel small, right? Because a number of people usually that can be coached is, it's kind of a handful that you can get your arms wrapped around. I guess in some organizations where they have big executive coaching programs, that might not be true for. But what I think is true in that example and any other ones, why are you doing it? Why are we coaching these people? I'm hoping, and more than likely, I've seen so many great executive coaches have a really clear leadership model, right? Have competencies they're trying to impact, something that they're ultimately trying to achieve. And so if you could think about even doing pre-measures, post-measures with the person you're coaching and the people who are on their teams, right? Those are ways to kind of start to think about what are we affecting? And I'm telling you, in the leadership space, connecting leadership and management to engagement is pretty easy. And so looking for that, again, that connection to employee engagement is what I would probably do after you think about the measures of success within that program.
Yeah, I also think about if you're one of the employees who is offered coaching, how might that experience impact how you feel about the organization? If I'm one of these employees that they're going to invest in and coach, does that change how I feel about the organization, that maybe they care about me more than maybe I thought beforehand, and they're investing in me, and I'm one of these people that they really want to see grow and develop? And how does that impact my perception of the organization, my likelihood to stay, my likelihood to recommend? And then I also think about if you're investing in coaching at the executive and the manager level and the leadership level, what we know from the research that the Limeade Institute has done and others is that both management and leaders are some of the most significant contributors to perceived organizational support.
Yeah.
You need amazing leaders, you need amazing managers, and so if you're investing in that level, I think you can also tie that to what we know about the impact that has on all the employees that they serve.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great question.
And another great question that came on the board in your presentation was about innovation. Do you have any recommendations about tracking and measuring innovation?
Oh, that's a great topic. So Lindsay and I are laughing because I did a presentation last year, I don't know when it was, around looking at the statistical connection between well-being and innovation, and engagement and innovation, and inclusion and innovation. So there actually are really great research studies in all of those areas, being able to make that kind of people connection, that kind of what needs to happen. How do people need to be treated? How do people need to feel about their work in order to feel like they can be creative and they can enact that creativity into something that actually looks like innovation, right? And so that one is an easy one for me of saying, oh yeah, look at the great research around, engagement. There's a bunch of research around how engagement is related to innovation, the concept of well-being, right? Like caring about people as people. Why in the heck would somebody come to work and give you their best ideas if they didn't feel like you cared about them as a human being, as a person, right? So there's some really interesting connections about specific aspects of well-being related to innovation. So I think I'm mostly talking about what's upstream from innovation and the great research that's out there. And so what you could look at, it depends on what your organization does, but look to see if you measure any of that already, look to see kind of how that might vary across departments, and maybe how that is related to some measure of innovation that you have. I think measuring innovation itself is a little tricky.
But I was thinking one of our customers, I have had the privilege of going to their headquarters several times, and they have every patent that they've ever created is a plaque on these walls. And I mean, they go up forever. And the first thing I thought when I saw that is, ooh, I want to see if there's a relationship between number of patents created and that individual's level of engagement and well-being. And if you think about it at a really human level, if an individual isn't taking care of themselves, you know, they're not getting enough sleep, they're stressed out by financial burdens, they don't have a sense of community and people supporting them, you don't even really have the opportunity to have an innovative new idea. And then if you come to work and are under conditions that don't make you feel safe and courageous to say, this might be crazy, but I think this could be cool, you're going to miss out on that entire thing. There's really interesting concepts of sort of resilience and optimism required to be an innovator. And we know that there's relationships between all of those things and well-being and engagement.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one more question from our discussion, and one was about how often you should do these analyses. You know, I think it was in reference to the calculator that you showed earlier. How often would you recommend tracking the results? And is there a formula or recommendations, and does it vary based on the program, for example?
Yeah, my first response would be exactly what you said, Laura, is it probably does vary on your program. It probably does vary on what you're trying to measure, kind of the rhythm of your program. I'd say at least year over year is probably where I would start, and that doesn't feel too big and too huge. Then going to quarterly starts to get, it's a lot, but it probably does depend on your program or what you're focusing on.
Absolutely. I do think it's interesting. I was at an organization not too long ago, and they were saying, well, we do our employee engagement survey every 4 years. And I said, you know, it's funny, I feel a little differently about work than I did in 2015. You know what I mean? And so, while I think annual is great, I think our goal is to get to a place where this is much more fluid.
Yes.
This is more of a dialogue, a call and response, an ask and respond relationship between the employer and the employee. And so shifting your thinking from, I'm going to sort of take these snapshots in time to how can I see how this is changing and evolving as we take action and then ask again, to something more fluid, I think is where we want to get to. I don't know that we have the tools we need necessarily to do that yet, but I think we know that's where we need to go.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Lindsay. It's kind of like the old person version and the young person version of that. I think you're exactly right. If it was easier, we should be more fluid.
Absolutely.
It's just not easier yet.
Yes.
We're working on that, aren't we?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. And for those of you who, sorry, we didn't have the chance to answer all the questions, but I'll share any additional questions with our guest speakers. Thank you so much for your time, Laura and Lindsay. This is very helpful, and I really see a lot of connections even with the work that we do at the Conference Board, and definitely for very relevant for many of our members. So thank you for your time. And I should mention for those listeners that are still online, please take a look at some upcoming resources that are coming up, both publications as well as webcasts. And again, a reminder that this recording will be available on demand within the next 48 hours, and you're welcome to share it with others in your team or organization. I'm Laura Sabatini, Principal Researcher with the Conference Board, and have a good rest of the day or evening.